The Godfather taught the whole world what a mafia wife is. She pours the wine, raises the children, and asks no questions. She looks away while the men decide who lives. That woman is a fantasy. The real ones were nothing like her. One of them fired a weapon while 6 months pregnant. One ran a crime alliance so coldly a hit TV series copied her. One named her own son Michael Corleone, then caused more deaths than the film's hero ever did. And one sat in an open courtroom and broke the single rule the Mafia would end your life for breaking. The real women of the Mafia were never background decoration. They took revenge with their own hands. They ran entire criminal empires, and they broke the mob's deepest rules. And almost nobody knows their names. Section 1. The wife in the background. Think about the women in The Godfather for a second. There is Kay, Michael's wife, who spends most of 3 films just trying to work out what her husband actually does for a living. There is Carmela, the mother of the family, who cooks, prays, and never once asks a single question about the business being run in the next room. The films love these women, but they keep them far away from the real action. They pour the wine. They raise the children. They look the other way. When the men sit down to decide who lives and who gets taken out, the wives are politely sent off to a different part of the house. That picture is so powerful that most people assume it was simply true everywhere. The silent wife, the loyal woman who knew nothing and said even less. And for a very long time, the law believed it as well. Police and prosecutors treated the wives, sisters, and mothers of these men almost like furniture, present in the room but harmless, and never worth a closer look. They were wrong about that. The woman who first proved how wrong was barely an adult, and she did it with a baby on the way. Her name was Assunta Maresca, though hardly anyone ever called her that. They called her Pupetta, which means little doll, a nickname she picked up because she was small, pretty, and had once won a local beauty contest. She grew up near Naples in the 1950s, inside a family that was already deep in the world of the Camorra, the crime network that runs through that part of Italy, much the way the more famous mob runs through Sicily. Her father moved smuggled goods. Her relatives were known for settling arguments with knives. So Pupetta did not stumble into this life as an outsider. She was born right in the middle of it. In 1955, she married a man named Pasquale Simonetti, a rising figure in that same world. The marriage did not last long, and not because the feelings faded. Within months, Simonetti was ambushed by rivals and did not survive. Pupetta was a widow before she had really finished being a newlywed. She was also pregnant. This is the moment where her story stops looking anything like the movies. A grieving wife in a film cries, wears black, and waits for the men to sort it out. Pupetta did not wait for anyone. She worked out who she believed had given the order to end her husband's life. She got hold of a revolver. And not long after, in the middle of the day, she walked straight up to that man and fired. He did not survive. She was around 20 years old and 6 months pregnant when she did it. Sit with how strange that is, even today. Not a hardened soldier, not a hired hand brought in for the job. A young, pregnant woman in a dress, doing the one thing everybody had quietly assumed only the men in this world were willing or able to do. What came next turned her into a household name across the whole country. She was arrested and put on trial, and that trial became a national event. Reporters crammed into the courtroom. Crowds gathered outside the doors, and rather than weeping or begging for mercy or claiming she had lost her mind, Pupetta stood there perfectly calm and told the court in plain terms that she would do the exact same thing all over again if she had to. People in the room reportedly cheered. Here was a woman openly owning the most serious crime there is and treating it as something she had every right to do. She was found guilty and sentenced to more than a decade locked away. She gave birth to her son while she was inside. She served around 10 years, then walked back out into the same world she came from, her legend now fully built. People started calling her Lady Camorra. In the public imagination, she had become royalty of the underworld, and not because of who her husband was, but because of what she herself had done. Her life did not quietly end there. Years later, she took up with another man tied to that same crime world and had more children. Decades after that, when she was an older woman, prosecutors accused her of being involved in ordering another person to be taken out, this time linked to a war between rival groups in the 1980s. She went on trial a second time. On that occasion, the court cleared her. She lived a long life and passed away in 2021 at 86. Still one of the most recognized faces in the entire history of Italian organized crime. Her story was even turned into films while she was alive to watch them. Now hold her up next to Kay and Carmela for a moment. The movie wives are defined almost entirely by what they do not see and do not do. Pupetta is defined by the exact opposite. She saw precisely what her world was, refused to look away from it, and acted with a kind of nerve that the made-up men in those famous films would have respected. The screenwriters handed us women who stay safe by staying quiet. Real life had already produced a woman who stayed standing by doing the unthinkable herself, and then defending it out loud in a courtroom packed with strangers. But here is the part really worth holding on to. Pupetta was not some freak exception, the one-in-a-million case you can shrug off and forget. She was closer to the start of a pattern. Because while she was busy becoming a legend in the 1950s, another woman just a short drive away was about to lose her own husband to that same world. And instead of picking up a weapon for a single act of revenge, she would pick up the whole criminal operation he left behind and run it for the next 40 years. Section 2. The Widow Who Took the Throne. A short drive north of Naples sits a town called Afragola. Back in the 1970s, it belonged, in every way that counted, to a man named Gennaro Moccia. He was the head of the local Camorra clan, the kind of figure who decided who worked, who paid, and who got left alone. Then one day, rival clans caught up with him. He was ambushed and did not survive. Just like that, the most powerful man in Afragola was gone. In the movie version of this story, that is where the Moccia family's reign ends. The widow puts on black, the rivals move in, and whatever the husband built gets swallowed up or handed down to a son who may or may not be ready. None of that happened. The widow was named Anna Mazza, and rather than stepping back, she stepped forward and seized the whole thing for herself. What she did next is hard to overstate. She did not simply keep her husband's name alive, she ran his organization. For more than 20 years, she was the brain behind the Moccia clan, and she stayed its matriarch and a feared name long after that, right up to her death in 2017. Counting from the day her husband was taken out in the 1970s to the day she died, that is roughly 4 decades in which her family kept its grip on Afragola and the towns around it. She grew the clan into one of the biggest powers in the region, with money flooding in from protection rackets, building contracts, land deals, and control of the local quarries. Her nickname tells you how people saw her. They called her the Black Widow of the Camorra. Closer to home, people were more careful. They rarely called her a boss to her face. They called her the Lady, a polite little word used to dodge saying the real one out loud. Then there is the part that earned her a place in the history books. Anna Mazza became the first woman in Italy ever convicted of mafia crimes. For years, the courts had leaned on that same lazy idea from the movies, that the women in these families were just bystanders. Mazza shattered that idea completely. The state looked hard at what she was doing and had to accept she was not standing behind a boss. She was the boss. Around herself, she built something close to an all-female power structure. Reports describe a personal protection detail made up entirely of women guarding the matriarch, a setup so unusual it sounds made up, except it is real. But the boldest thing Anna Mazza ever pulled off did not happen inside the underworld at all. It happened against the Italian government, and she came out ahead. In the 1990s, the authorities tried a familiar tactic to weaken her. They forced her to leave Naples and live far away, in a small town in the north of Italy, hundreds of kilometers from her base. The thinking was simple. Cut her off from her people, and her power would dry up. It did not dry up. From the north, she carried on running the clan's affairs, and she even began making contact with criminal groups up there, quietly stretching her reach instead of losing it. Locals in that northern town were outraged that a Camorra matriarch had been dropped into their quiet corner, and they protested loudly. Mazza protested too, but from the other side. She complained about her treatment, wrote a letter to the president of Italy himself, argued she was being treated unfairly as a woman and a mother, and turned her own punishment into a public battle. And here is the result almost no one would believe. The fuss grew so large that the Italian parliament went and changed the law about where people had to serve this kind of sentence. A new law was passed, and Anna Mazza was sent back home to Afragola, returning to her own territory under guard and welcomed by her own clan. Sit with that. A Camorra widow pressured an entire national government into rewriting its own rules. Her life carried plenty of loss along the way. She had several children, every one of them pulled into the family business somehow, and in 1987, one of her sons was taken out by a rival clan, the Maiulo. That set off another feud between the families, and the Mocha clan came out of it on top. The same year, Mazza herself was arrested, and even then she kept steering the family's affairs from where she was held. She reached old age and died in 2017 at 80 after a stroke. By that point, she had spent more than 4 decades as one of the most important figures in the entire history of the Camorra. Now, hold her up against the women the movies handed us one more time. Carmela Corleone keeps a tidy house and asks no questions. Anna Mazza ran a criminal empire, won a feud, built a guard of women, and bent a country's laws to fit her own wishes. And she did all of it after the man she married was already in the ground. The fiction gave us a wife who stays safe by fading into the background. Real life gave us a widow who marched to the very front and held that spot for 40 years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And Mazza at least had the grim freedom of being a widow, able to rule because her husband was no longer in the picture. The next woman did not even need that opening. In Sicily, the heartland of the mob the whole world thinks it understands, one wife took command while her husband was still very much alive and only locked away, and she rattled the state so badly that it came up with a punishment it had never once used on a woman before. Section 3. The wife too dangerous for a normal cell. Sicily is the place most people picture the moment they hear the word Mafia. It is the home of the families The Godfather was loosely built on, the island where the old rules about silence and respect run deepest. It is also where one wife pushed those rules so far that the Italian state ran out of ordinary ways to handle her. Her name was Maria Filippa Messina. She came from around Calatabiano, a small farming town about 50 kilometers from the city of Catania. Her husband was a man named Nino Cinturino, the local boss, whose group was tied to one of the bigger crime networks in that part of Sicily, and locked in a long feud with a rival family known as the Laudani. For a while, this looked like a fairly ordinary mob marriage. He held the power, she stood at his side. Then, in 1992, the law caught up with him, and he was locked away. In the version of this we all expect, that is the point where the wife sinks into the background. She visits her husband, raises the children, keeps the house, and waits for him to come home, or for some other man to take charge. Maria Filippa Messina did none of it. With her husband behind bars, she stepped into his place and began running things herself, and she was only in her 20s when she did. She did not simply pass along notes or mind the cash, the little supporting jobs the movies allow a woman to have. She ran the clan's business head-on, including its bread and butter, squeezing protection money out of local people. And during that long feud with the rival family, investigators say she did the one thing that, in this world, separates a helper from a true boss. She gave the orders. According to the people who later built the case against her, she personally directed having rivals taken out. That is how she earned a reputation normally kept for the hardest men in these families. Investigators painted her as a cold and merciless figure, and said that by the time they moved in on her, she was busy planning a major strike against a rival group. She was not a grieving wife keeping a seat warm for someone else. She had made the role of boss her own. She was arrested in the mid-1990s, and what happened to her after that arrest is the part that puts her in a class by herself. Italy has a special prison regime known simply by a number, 41 bis. In plain words, it is the harshest treatment the Italian system has to offer. A person held under it is kept almost completely alone, cut off from other people, with contact to the outside world squeezed down to nearly nothing. The whole purpose of it is to stop powerful bosses from doing what they had always managed before, which was to sit in a cell and keep running their entire organization through visitors and past messages. It was designed for the most dangerous people the country had ever locked up, and for years, every last one of them had been a man. In November 1996, the Italian state placed Maria Filippa Messina under that regime. She was the first woman in the country's history to be treated this way, and the reasoning behind it is what matters. The government did not size her up as a minor helper who would crack under pressure. It judged her so dangerous, so capable of steering her family's operations from a cell, that she needed the very same brutal isolation used on the most feared bosses in the land. The law itself had dropped a wife into the same box as the worst men it had ever caught. She remained under that regime for roughly 2.5 years, from late 1996 into 1999, and in a final detail that tells you plenty about her, she refused to go quietly. In December of 1996, she sent a letter to a newspaper, complaining about being the first woman ever subjected to the hard regime. Most people in her shoes would want to disappear from the headlines. She used hers to make a statement. Hold that against what the movies were ever willing to imagine. The fictional mob wife is someone the men shield, someone kept far away from the dangerous decisions because she is seen as fragile or loyal, or simply not part of that side of the business. No screenwriter wrote a wife the police feared so much that they reached for their harshest weapon the second they had her in custody. Maria Filipa Messina was precisely that. The state never saw a bystander who happened to be married to a boss. It saw a boss, and it treated her as one. And Messina, for all her nerve, was operating back in the 1990s, in the old world of feuds and territory. Decades later, in the city of Palermo, another wife would carry the very same idea into the modern age. With her own husband locked up, she would move shipments of product clear across an ocean, and even sit the other wives of the family down to coach them on exactly how to carry themselves when their own turn in a courtroom finally arrived. Section 4. The wife who ran the family business. Teresa Marino was running a Cosa Nostra crime family in Palermo barely 10 years ago, which makes her proof that none of this is ancient history. She lived in the Sicilian capital, one of the oldest homes of the Mafia anywhere on earth. Her husband was Tommaso Lopresti, a boss with a nickname that translates roughly to the Glutton, and he led a faction known as Porta Nuova, named after a district in the heart of the city. Then, in April 2014, Lopresti was arrested and sent to prison. You can probably guess what investigators expected to happen next, because it is the same lazy assumption that runs through this whole story. The boss is gone, so the clan either falls apart or waits for another man to take over. What actually happened is that his wife picked up the entire operation and ran it, and she ran it like a business. This is the part that makes Teresa Marino stand out even among the women in this video. She did not simply hold things together. According to the police who spent months listening in on her phone calls, she steered the clan's daily affairs, often acting on instructions her husband managed to smuggle out of his cell. She oversaw the group's money from the trade in product, including shipments brought all the way from South America. She kept the protection rackets running. Her people even forced their way into the Palermo fish trade, seizing wholesale companies and squeezing out their last honest competitor by cutting off his supply. But the detail that really shows you what kind of leader she was is quieter than any of that. The clan paid monthly money to the families of members who were locked up, a sort of welfare system for the wives and children left behind. Marino took charge of that budget. She sat down and decided, family by family, who kept getting paid and who did not. Investigators described it almost like a spending review, the kind of thing a company finance team does. In plain words, she was running the books of a criminal organization, and she understood that side of the work better than most of the men ever had. There is one more thing she did that no screenwriter would have thought to put in a film, because it is too specific and too real. Having been a mafia wife herself while her husband sat in a cell, Marino knew exactly what these women lived through, and she paid close attention to the ones left behind. So she coached them. When other wives in the network had to appear in court, she gave them advice on how to carry themselves. Do not cry in the courtroom, she would tell them. Hold your head up, carry yourself with pride as a member of the family, and save your tears for behind closed doors at home. She was not only managing money and product, she was managing people, teaching the next wave of women how to wear the role. When the news of her arrest broke, it caused a stir for one simple reason. People had spent decades picturing the mafia through films like The Godfather, where the men rule and the women stay home. Here was living proof the picture was wrong. One Italian prosecutor put it bluntly, saying her case showed times had changed and that there was now equality between the sexes, even inside Cosa Nostra. Newspapers reached for the obvious headline. Forget The Godfather, they wrote, because the reality was something the movie never imagined. In December 2015, police swept her up along with 37 other people in raids spread across 4 cities: Palermo, Rome, Naples, and Milan. The charges stacked up fast, from belonging to the Mafia to moving product, running protection rackets, dealing in weapons, and rigging bids for public contracts. She was 38 years old, a mother of 5, and already a grandmother, and she was later convicted for running her husband's criminal world while he was behind bars. The story has a final twist that is almost too strange to believe. Years later, after her husband was released, the couple renewed their wedding vows at a grand basilica in the heart of Palermo in 2024. That same church holds the memorial of Giovanni Falcone, the famous prosecutor who was taken out by the Mafia in 1992, in an attack that also claimed his wife and 3 of his bodyguards. So a convicted Mafia couple celebrated their marriage just steps from a monument to the man who died fighting their world. The priest who led the ceremony later said he had no idea who they were. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every woman we have followed so far took charge of a single clan, one family, one territory, one husband's empty chair. But cross from Sicily over to the mainland, into the crowded streets of Naples, and you find a woman who did not settle for one clan. She took control of a whole alliance of them, stitched several powerful families into a single machine, and ran the underworld of an entire major city. Section 5. The Godmother of Naples. Maria Licciardi did not settle for running one clan. She ran a whole alliance of them, a federation of powerful crime families that controlled the underworld of one of the biggest cities in Italy. She was born in 1951 in Secondigliano, a rough district on the northern edge of Naples, where crime was the family trade. Her brother Gennaro built a clan in the neighborhood and stitched several Naples families into one group, a kind of super alliance that carved up the product trade and the protection rackets across whole swaths of the city, including hard areas like Scampia. For a while, it was a man's operation, steered by Gennaro and a handful of other bosses. Then, one by one, the men ran out. Gennaro died in prison in 1994. Her other brothers were locked up. Her husband was also in the Camorra, was taken off the board as well. In almost any other story, that is a family quietly collapsing. Instead, the small, soft-spoken sister stepped into the gap, and the people who underestimated her learned in a hurry that they had made a serious mistake. The men of the Camorra liked to call her by small, almost fond nicknames. The little one, because she was short. Among the women, she was the princess, a sign of her high standing. But the name that truly stuck, the one spoken with real weight, was La Madrina, the godmother. By the mid-1990s, with the men of her family gone, she held the whole alliance in her hands, and under her, it turned into something far sharper than it had ever been. She made it more organized, more secretive, much harder for the police to break. She thought less like a street tough and more like the head of a company, and the alliance grew richer and stronger for it. One choice she made captures the exact kind of mind she had. In the spring of 1999, a huge shipment of product arrived from Turkey. It was unusually pure, far stronger than the usual street supply. Licciardi gave an order that, on the surface, sounds almost responsible. She said it must not be sold. It was too strong, she reasoned, and the people who bought it would not survive it. This was not mercy, it was math. Customers who do not survive cannot keep buying. Wiping out the very people who fed the alliance's profits was, in her eyes, simply bad business. That was the level she operated on, treating her customer base the way a firm treats repeat sales. One of the clans under her, the Lorusso group, refused to listen. They had always bristled at taking orders from a woman, so they packaged the strong product and pushed it onto the streets regardless. The outcome was exactly what she had warned. People across Naples who used it did not survive, with 11 lost in a single month. The deaths brought a storm of public anger and a heavy police crackdown onto the entire network. The Lo Russo clan broke away. What came next was a vicious feud, fought out in the open with explosives and attacks in broad daylight. And when 4 of her own people were taken out in her home district, Licciardi hit back without hesitation. The law spent years trying to lay hands on her. She had sat among the most wanted fugitives in the whole country before she finally slipped and was caught in 2001. She served around 8 years and walked free in 2009. Retirement was not her plan. By the end of the following decade, she was on the run again, slipping past a major operation aimed at her old alliance. Her freedom ran out for good in 2021, when officers stopped her at a Rome airport as she tried to fly to Spain to visit her daughter. She was 70, and by the account of the officers who took her, she did not so much as blink. The charges stacked up around her, from extortion to running a criminal group, and a couple of years later, a court handed her close to 13 years. Here is the detail that ties her whole story straight to the point of this video. When Italy created its most famous modern portrait of the Naples underworld, the book and the hit series both called Gomorrah, the writers needed a female crime boss for the screen. They did not dream one up out of thin air. The chain-smoking, ice-cold woman who runs a clan in that series was modeled by the very author who created her on Maria Licciardi. The fiction was not bigger than the truth. The fiction had to borrow from it. Licciardi climbed to the top because the men around her died or were caged, leaving the seat of power empty for her to claim. But there is another woman from the same city who never needed an empty seat at all. For more than 10 years, she ran one of the most feared crime organizations Naples had ever produced on behalf of a brother who sat in a prison cell the entire time. And she did it while showing the world the face of a gray-haired, church-going woman who, by all appearances, simply enjoyed tending to her roses. Section 6. Ice Eyes. For more than a decade, Rosetta Cutolo ran one of the most feared crime organizations Naples ever produced, and she did it the entire time on behalf of a brother who was very much alive, very much the boss on paper, and very much sealed inside a prison cell. She did not inherit an empty chair. She took the wheel of a machine whose owner was simply unreachable, locked away, and she kept it turning for years. To understand her, you have to understand her brother first. His name was Raffaele Cutolo, and in the 1970s, he tried something no Camorra boss had pulled off before. The Naples underworld had always been a tangle of small, scattered clans, each scrapping over its own corner. Raphael set out to bolt them together into one huge, organized army, with ranks and rules, a single machine he named the Nuova Camorra Organizzata. At its height, it counted thousands of members. There was just one snag in his grand design. Raphael spent almost his whole life behind bars, locked up since the 1960s. So who actually ran this army out in the real world, day to day, while the boss sat in a cell handing down orders? Not a trusted lieutenant, not a feared enforcer. His older sister. Rosetta carried her brother's orders out of prison and turned them into action. She collected money from local businesses. She dealt face-to-face with other gangsters. In 1980, she even sat down at a top-level summit with bosses from the Sicilian Mafia, standing in for her brother, trying to broker an end to a long, deadly feud. She was the bridge between the man in the cell and the organization on the street. And people who knew the group said the plain truth out loud. Without Rosetta, the whole thing would have collapsed. She earned a nickname that suited her exactly. They called her Ice Eyes. Where her brother was loud and theatrical, giving interviews and making speeches in courtrooms, Rosetta was cold, quiet, and all business. She had a gift for numbers and money, the steady hand keeping the books balanced and the orders moving, while her brother soaked up all the attention. And here is the part that makes her story so unsettling. If you had passed Rosetta Cutolo on the street, you would have seen exactly the kind of woman the Godfather taught us to overlook. She was gray-haired and plain. She wore simple men's shirts and pulled her hair back without fuss. She lived quietly with her elderly mother in their hometown, and she spent her days tending her roses. She looked deeply religious and utterly harmless. By some accounts, she had given up a great love in her youth so she could devote herself to her brother, and she never married. That gentle, church-going image was no accident. It was armor. While everyone assumed the devout woman in the garden was nobody worth watching, that same woman was steering one of the most powerful and feared crime networks in the country. She had convinced the authorities she was harmless, and her dull, frumpy appearance did half the work for her. In October 1981, police finally raided a building where she was holding a meeting of the organization. She did not get caught. She was smuggled out, hidden under a rug in the back of a car, which was calmly driven straight past the police checkpoints by the local priest. After that, she disappeared. For around 10 years, she lived as a fugitive, moving between safe houses in different cities, and at times she was sheltered with the help of clergy and tucked away inside a convent. That earned her one more nickname, a nod to her holy disguise, meaning roughly, Rosetta of the Nuns. Investigators believed her reach stretched into darker work too, including a plan to strike at a police headquarters that only just fell through. When the police closed in on her hideout in February 1993, Rosetta finally gave herself up. She told them, simply, that she was tired of life on the run. By then, a court had already convicted her, in her absence, of belonging to and helping run a Mafia organization, handing her 9 years that were later cut to 5. But this is where honesty matters, because her case was never tidy. She was put on trial in connection with serious crimes and walked free again and again, cleared of 9 separate charges tied to people being taken out. Her brother insisted to the very end that she was completely innocent, that she had never been part of the Camorra, and had only done small favors for him. The investigators saw it the other way, casting her as the real brain holding the operation together. The truth most likely sits closer to the prosecutor's view, but the disagreement itself shows how skilled she was at seeming like someone she was not. She lived a long life and died in her hometown in 2023 at the age of 86. Think back to the women the movies hand us. The quiet grandmother in the kitchen, praying, cooking, never a danger to anyone. Rosetta Cutolo was that exact figure, right? Down to the roses and the religious calm. And that is the cold lesson buried in her story. The stereotype the film sold us was not simply wrong. It was the perfect mask, and she wore it for years while running an empire. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Rosetta survived by being invisible, by making herself look as dull and harmless as a person could be. But not every woman in the Naples underworld played it that way. One of them did the exact opposite. She was loud, vain, and openly feared across the city as the queen of her clan. And when the police finally cornered her crouched behind a false wall, she had one strange request before they were allowed to take her away. Section 7. The Queen of Forcella. The last woman we met survived by disappearing, by making herself look as plain and harmless as possible. This one did the exact opposite. She was glamorous, vain, sharp-tongued, and impossible to miss. And she ran her slice of Naples with her name and face known to everyone in it. Where Rosetta Cutolo hid in the shadows, Erminia Giuliano stood in the spotlight and dared anyone to challenge her. She was born in 1955 in Forcella, a dense, narrow-streeted district right in the historic heart of Naples. Forcella was the home turf of the Giuliano clan, and the Giulianos were a family business in the most literal sense. For nearly 30 years, the clan was led by her brother Luigi. One by one, the law worked through the men of the family, 5 of them in total, including Guglielmo, Carmine, who was known as the Lion, and finally, Luigi himself, arrested in early 2000. With every one of them gone, the family hit a problem. The only grown male heir still free was a nephew, and by the clan's own judgment, he simply was not up to the job. So they turned to someone they trusted far more, Erminia. She did not merely keep the chair warm. According to investigators, she reorganized the clan from top to bottom, sorting out its ranks and running its daily affairs once her brothers were locked away. The clan made its money from the product trade and from illegal betting on football matches, and Erminia had her own specialty inside the operation, the faking of banknotes. Under her, the Giuliano name kept its grip on Forcella, and the Italian state took her seriously enough to place her on its list of the 30 most dangerous criminals in the whole country. Her nickname was Celeste, which means sky blue, a name she earned for her striking pale blue eyes. It sounds soft and pretty. The woman behind it was not. By various accounts, she had a violent streak from a young age, the sort of person who, when boredom set in, would talk about wanting to hurt someone. Reports say she once attacked a rival woman with a blade in 1997, and that in 1999, she settled another score by smashing her car straight through an enemy's shop window. She was also said to move in glamorous circles. During the years the football legend Diego Maradona played for Napoli, he was reported to be friendly with the family. For 10 months after her brother's arrest, Erminia stayed a step ahead of the police, a wanted fugitive moving carefully around the very city she ruled. Then, 2 days before Christmas in the year 2000, they finally caught up with her. Officers raided the home of one of her daughters in Forcella, slipping in shortly after midnight. At first, there was no sign of her. But behind a kitchen cupboard sat a sliding wall panel, and behind that panel was a hidden room. Inside it, they found the queen of the clan. Her response in that moment is the detail that captures her completely. Faced with arrest, most people are thinking about lawyers, or escape, or pure panic. Erminia had a different priority. Before she would let the officers take her off to jail, she asked to be allowed to visit a hairdresser. She wanted her hair done first. Even as her reign collapsed, with police filling her hiding place, she cared about how she would look. That single request tells you everything about the kind of boss she was. One who wore her power like a fashion statement and refused to be hauled out looking anything less than her best. This is where Erminia matters to the bigger picture. The films trained us to see a woman like her as decoration, beautiful, vain, fixated on her appearance, the kind of character a mob movie parks on the arm of a powerful man and then forgets about. Erminia was beautiful and vain and fixated on her appearance. She was also a feared crime boss who rebuilt an entire clan and made the national most wanted list. The two things were not opposites. They lived inside the same woman at the same time. The movie assumed the glamour ruled out the danger. In reality, the glamour was just the wrapping on something hard. Her story carried a sting in the tail, though not one she chose. Less than 2 years after her capture in 2002, her brother Luigi, the man who had run the clan for decades, made a choice that shook the Naples underworld. He turned. He became a state witness and started giving evidence against fellow Camorra figures, including members of his own family. The clan Erminia had fought so hard to hold together was hollowed out. In the end, not by the police, but from the inside, by her own brother. Every woman in this video so far has belonged to the Italian underworld, the Camorra of Naples, or the Mafia of Sicily, working inside a single country and its rules. But the deadliest of them all operated far from Italy, in the brutal turf battles over product that turned the streets of Miami into a battlefield. She is credited by police with dozens of deaths. She is said to have invented a chilling new method for taking out her enemies, and in a final insult to the fiction, she named one of her own sons after a character from The Godfather. Section 8. The deadliest of them all. Griselda Blanco built her empire far from Italy, in Colombia and on the lawless streets of 1970s Miami. She was born in Colombia in 1943 and grew up poor in the rough neighborhoods of Medellin, pulled into crime as a child, picking pockets and stealing while she was still a kid. That early world shaped everything that came after. She learned fast that the only way to survive and then to rule was to be colder and harder than everyone around her. As a young woman, she moved to New York and got into smuggling. She started small, then moved into the far more profitable white powder that was about to flood America. Blanco was clever about it. She had special undergarments designed to hide the powder on the bodies of her couriers, slipping it past customs in ways that were hard to catch. The money rolled in faster than almost anyone had ever seen. By the mid-1970s, American authorities had already placed her on a most wanted list. Then she moved her operation to Miami, and Miami was never the same. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the city became one of the most lawless places in America, awash in cash and danger as rival groups fought over the product trade. Blanco sat right at the center of it. At her peak, she was reportedly moving tons of product and pulling in tens of millions of dollars a month. Her real signature, though, was not the smuggling. It was the fear she built her power on, and a method she is credited with making horribly common. She would send men riding on motorbikes who could pull up beside a target stuck in traffic, take the person out, and then weave away into the city before anyone could react. It was fast, hard to trace, and ruthless. She gave the order to have a great many people taken out this way. Exactly how many is something nobody can pin down for certain, and the number deserves care. Police estimate she was behind around 40 deaths. She was only ever convicted in connection with 3. And in the wilder retellings, the figure climbs as high as 250. The truth most likely sits at the lower end, but even the careful figure makes her one of the deadliest people the American products trade has ever produced. She picked up a grim nickname along the way, the Black Widow, because she was tied to the deaths of more than one of her own husbands. She married several times across her life, and a number of those men met violent ends that pointed straight back at her. But the single most telling detail of her whole story is something else. Griselda Blanco named one of her sons Michael Corleone. She took the name of the most famous fictional mob boss ever put on screen, the lead character of The Godfather, and handed it to her own child. The fiction did not have to dream up a figure like her. She was real. She was harder than the movie character she admired, and she pressed his name onto her family. The law finally caught her in 1985 when she was arrested in California, and she was sentenced to around 15 years for her smuggling operation. While she was already behind bars, prosecutors built a second case, charging her with arranging 3 deaths based on the word of a former enforcer who had worked for her. They wanted the most severe punishment the law allowed. But the case wobbled badly when it emerged that their key witness had been carrying on phone romances with staff inside the prosecutor's own office. In 1998, Blanco pleaded guilty to the 3 deaths in exchange for a lighter sentence. One of those cases was especially dark, an attack that also claimed the life of a 2-year-old child, the young son of the man she had targeted. After roughly 2 decades in American prisons, she was released and sent back to Colombia in 2004. For a few years, she lived quietly in Medellin. Then, in 2012, her past caught up with her in the most fitting way imaginable. As she walked out of a butcher shop, 2 men rode up on a motorbike, and one of them took her out before she could reach safety. She was 69, leaving the shop with her pregnant daughter-in-law. No one was ever brought to justice for it. The woman credited with inventing the motorbike method died by that exact method on a public street in broad daylight. The Godfather is the most famous picture of organized crime ever made. But at its heart, it is a story about men, with the women circling around the edges. Griselda Blanco circled nothing. She built her own empire from the ground up, ran it through terror, ran up a count of the dead that the fictional bosses would struggle to match, and then took the name of the movie's own leading man for her son. Reality did not copy the film. It went further. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Blanco's danger is beyond argument, written into court records and counted in the dead. But not every legendary mob woman is so easy to measure. Our next stop carries us back to mid-century America and to a woman whose name became a legend in the underworld, yet whose real power is far harder to prove, which raises a question this whole video has been circling. How much of a mob woman's fearsome reputation is solid fact, and how much of it is myth? Section 9. The Legend and the Truth. Virginia Hill was the most famous mob woman America ever produced, and also the hardest to pin down. She was born in 1916 in a poor corner of Alabama, one of 10 children. Her father traded horses and her mother ran a boarding house, and the family did not have much. As a teenager, she got out, moving to Chicago around the age of 17, where she took a job at an Italian restaurant that happened to be a favorite gathering spot for the men of Al Capone's organization. That was her doorway into the underworld, and she walked straight through it. What makes Hill interesting is how far she climbed in a world that had almost no room for women. She was charming, beautiful, and clever, and she made herself useful in ways these men valued. She could move money quietly. She could handle stolen goods. She grew close to a string of the most powerful gangsters in the country, names like Joe Adonis, Frank Costello, and Meyer Lansky. And she built a reputation as a trusted courier, carrying cash and messages between different branches of the mob. A man named Joe Epstein, who handled money for the Chicago outfit, was devoted to her and looked after her finances. And somewhere along the way, she ended up sitting on large sums of cash that nobody could quite explain. By the late 1940s, she was famous for one relationship above all the rest. She became the girlfriend of Benjamin Siegel, the gangster better known as Bugsy, the man who helped drag organized crime into Las Vegas by building the Flamingo Casino. Siegel poured money into that project, and when it was slow to pay off, the East Coast bosses who had funded him grew suspicious he was skimming from them. There were whispers that Hill was helping him move money quietly into bank accounts overseas. In June 1947, after a fight with Siegel, Hill left the country for Paris. Just days later, someone fired through the window of her Beverly Hills mansion, and Siegel did not survive. He was taken out in the very home he had leased for her, and the fact that she happened to be safely overseas when it happened has fed suspicion ever since that she may have been warned. Nobody was ever charged. The truth went into the ground with him. A few years later came the moment that turned Virginia
Hill from a mob insider into a national sensation. In 1951, the United States Senate was running a huge public investigation into organized crime, and Hill was called to testify. The press could not get enough of her. Newspapers crowned her the queen of the gangsters' malls. Cameras tracked her every move. When she took the stand, she denied knowing anything at all about the mob's criminal business, dodging questions with vague answers while the country watched, transfixed by her glamour and her nerve. The records, though, complicate that glamorous picture, and this is where the legend and the truth pull apart. The image most people remember is of a defiant, dangerous mob queen, a woman who supposedly helped run a product operation down in Mexico and stood as an equal among the most feared men in America. Some reports at the time described her in exactly those terms, but historians who have gone back and read the surviving hearing records paint a far quieter portrait. On the page, Hill comes across as a careful, guarded witness who said as little as she could manage. Much of her terrifying reputation, it turns out, was built by reporters who cared more about how she looked and how she behaved than about what she had really done. Her power, real as it was, came mostly from being close to powerful men, not from sitting at the top herself. What the Senate hearings did do was paint a target on her back. The tax authorities began tearing into her unexplained wealth and lavish spending, and rather than face them, Hill fled to Europe and settled in Austria, where she had married an Austrian ski instructor and had a son. She spent the rest of her life hounded by money troubles, unable to return to the high life she had known. In 1966, far from the spotlight, she died in Austria. Her death was ruled a suicide, though a few have long suspected the mob silenced her over a tell-all she was trying to sell. Either way, the legend outlived the woman by decades. So why include her at all if part of her story is smoke? Because even the smaller, truer version of Virginia Hill is more interesting than the women the movies bothered to write. She was a poor farm girl who clawed her way to the very center of the American underworld, handled its money, dated its most dangerous men, and then stared down the United States Senate without flinching. The fiction gives us decorative girlfriends. Reality gave us a woman the whole country could not stop watching, even when it never quite understood her. We have now seen women who ran clans, women who fought feuds, and women who became legends. But there is one last woman, and she did the single most dangerous thing anyone in this world can do. She did not run the mob, and she did not fight for it. She turned on it. In an open courtroom, the wife of one of the most powerful bosses in America stood up and broke the one rule that was never, ever meant to be broken. Section 10. The Wife Who Broke the Silence. Anna Genovese was the wife of Vito Genovese, one of the most feared bosses in American history, and the head of the crime family that still carries his name today. And she did the single most dangerous thing anyone in this world can do. She did not run the mob, and she did not fight for it. She turned on it, out loud, in a public courtroom, against the one rule the Mafia was built to protect. Anna's life with Vito began with a chilling sign of what he was. The two married in 1932, only about 12 days after Anna's first husband was found dead. Years later, a mob informant would tell the authorities that it was Vito himself who had arranged for that man to be taken out, clearing his own path to marry her. So from the very start, Anna knew exactly the kind of man she had tied herself to. She was no quiet housewife in the background either. Anna was a sharp businesswoman in her own right. She ran nightclubs in New York City, including some of the era's best-known drag clubs and gay bars, using her husband's connections to keep the police away and handing the family a cut of the profits. For a stretch, with Vito hiding out in Italy to dodge a charge back home, Anna ran her own world and lived largely on her own terms. Then Vito came back to America in the mid-1940s, and the marriage curdled. By 1950, Anna had walked out on him, and in 1952, she did something no high-ranking mob wife had ever dared. She took her own husband to court. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary case. Anna had filed
for financial support after their separation, the sort of claim any wife might make. But to win it, she had to prove how much money Vito truly had. And to do that, in open court, in front of reporters, she told the truth about where that money came from. That was the moment she broke omerta. And she did it, not in a quiet back room with detectives, but on a public stand for the whole country to read about. What she said tore the lid clean off the operation. Vito had claimed to be a humble scrap paper dealer, scraping by on a little over $100 a week. Anna told the court the real figure was around $20,000 a week, flowing in from rackets like the illegal lottery. She described how the money moved. She laid out the family's involvement in the product trade, in gambling, and in muscling its way into labor unions. She even said she was the only person who knew the combination to the family's safe. In a single stretch of testimony, a Mafia wife handed investigators a map of a major crime family's finances drawn from the inside. This was staggeringly dangerous, and everyone knew it. Anna told the court she had endured years of brutal treatment from Vito, and that she had been warned in plain terms what would happen if she revealed his true income. That a man would come and end her life. A famous newspaper columnist with mob ties wrote that if she were in Anna's shoes, she would be very careful crossing the street. A thinly veiled warning that everyone understood. By every rule of that world, Anna Genovese was not supposed to live long. But she did. Somehow, the woman who broke the unbreakable rule was never silenced. Vito's downfall took years longer and arrived through other cases, ending with a conviction connected to the product trade that put him away for the rest of his life. He died behind bars in 1969. Anna outlived the danger and the marriage both. And her story sat largely forgotten for decades until a popular podcast pulled it back into the light and people finally saw her for what she was. And what she was makes the perfect ending to this whole story. Set Anna beside the women the Godfather gave us. Kay, kept in the dark. Carmela, asking no questions. Their entire purpose is to guard the secret, to look away, to keep the silence. Anna Genovese was handed that exact part, the loyal mob wife who sees everything and says nothing. And she tore the script to pieces. She looked at the most powerful and frightening rule the Mafia had, the one men were taken out for breaking, and she broke it herself, in public, and walked away alive. The fiction begged its women to stay silent. Reality produced a wife who became the mob's worst nightmare simply by refusing to. So that is all 10 of them. The pregnant avenger, the widow who bent a nation's laws, the bosses and the godmothers, the legend, and the wife who talked. All that is left now is to stand these real women shoulder to shoulder against the quiet wives Hollywood sold us for 50 years. Because once you see them lined up together, the gap between the story and the truth says something bigger. Not just about the Mafia, but about every comfortable myth we have ever swallowed without checking. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.